What if God, this concept of God, is nothing else than the matrix we live in? Now, of course, this might sound as a very, far-fetched opinion. This is just a point that I reached, and, in my introspection, I often reach points of view that definitely will go beyond many people's willingness to accept things, because it's always a willing to accept something or to reject it. But of course, there is only acceptance, because you can't reject something that you don't accept at first. Because you accept a certain thing, you analyze it, even if it is a very swift process, and then you reject it because you do not accept it. So, what if this God is actually the matrix we live in? Can this actually be done in an occult way? Well, judging only from a perspective of these new age spiritualists, right, and the agendas that they present, that, energy can be manipulated, and where our attention goes, right, energy flows. If we think about Europe, right, Europe for 1000 years or somewhat less has been traumatized constantly by this hideous construct called Christianity. Now, I don't know why people believe that, trusting in a deity that doesn't even know about you is so important. Ultimately, all this shows is people would rather believe in something that doesn't exist, or it may exist but doesn't have any influence upon us, because, well, everyone is running away from responsibilities, right? When something bad happens, it's always God's fault. And even when you listen to people, you always have to listen to how people speak, right? God's will, right? God wills it, right? This stinks of victimization, right? It's always a victimization, because, well, that's what people will do through ignorance, right? It's always God's will. It's, people are incapable because God wills it, right? That's why people are kissing butts, right? Godly butts when things are going well. And, when things aren't going well, they are swearing this so-called God that, they fear. Not to mention, there are so many people who are inventing their own God, and they are traumatizing their children with, horror stories that if you don't bend yourself to God, or technically surrender your own discernment and be as ignorant as them, then you will burn in hell, or whatever hellish ideas they can think of in their, twisted, awkward imagination and mind that would simply prefer to run away from any responsibility than do something to improve their own life. Let's not forget that there is that type of people that are called the crab people, right? When crabs are fished, right, when you catch a crab, instead of running away, it will prefer to use its pincers, right, to catch any other fleeing crabs, right, and keep them together, keep them close. And another crab being caught, again, they would rather use their pincers to simply, immobilize other fleeing crabs, right? So these are the kind of people who would rather you stay stupid and ignorant, and never achieve anything because of a so-called fear that you would leave them. Well, it's basically not a fear that you will leave them, it's just a fear that you will become better than them. And such a fear always exists only in ignorance, because, well, where else can actually that be, right? If you weren't ignorant, if you were developing, right, if you were improving your own life and yourself, being the dumbest in the class, right, is in a way the best thing, because you have to learn things from the others, right? When you are the best in the class, it kind of sucks, because usually teachers won't bother you that much. They will, try to help the ones who actually need the help. So, yeah, that's one point. So through all this, religion that we have been going through, specifically in Europe and, well, America, because America has the same karma as Europe, well, ancestral karma before America started being formed. Now, the point is that through so many, hundreds of years of repression, right? This created so much stress, so much anxiety, right? The greatest fear in this world is that of God, right? And once you have a great fear of something that doesn't exist, it's hundreds of years of, such accumulated karma it's gonna take a while for that to be purged, and for people to become suddenly aware that the only God they need to worship is kind of they themselves, who they truly are, not their ego, not their personas or something like that. Everyone is here to pursue their own, independent, let's say, spiritual journey. But, well, independent doesn't actually mean separate from others. The point is, in your mental, emotional, and psychological body, right? You have, and you basically are alone, right? In your mind, in your psyche, in your emotions, everyone is alone, right? You are alone in there, because if there are other beings in there, right? Let's say, except some of the voices you may be discussing with, right? Technically, you are talking with yourself, but you're imagining that you're speaking with certain people, right? When this is not the case, well, then that person most likely needs an exorcist, or they're a nutcase, right? If there are multiple independent voices. So spirituality is a lonely road unless you find a dharma, right? Unless you find a guru or a dharma, or unless you find a purpose, right? Because if I remember correctly, dharma means purpose. Unless you find something that you become devoted to, and you also find someone who can actually guide you on the road, right? Because others most likely are more knowledgeable of less beaten paths, and it's very easy to get lost on those. So the point about this is, hundreds of years people have been traumatized with this inexistent god, but most likely this monstrosity actually reached a certain peak, and most likely also continued to evolve, because back in the times people didn't have the distractions that we nowadays have. They only had the field to work and the fear of God, because, well, apparently you actually have to fear a so-called dumb god of love, right? Kind of a useless, mental creation, because people always have to believe in something beyond them. And this only occurs out of ignorance, because when you are running away from who you truly are, it means that you are an ignorant. You have embraced literally anything else than you are. You have created personalities, so you need to play this game that you are something on this planet, so you need to believe in something else other than who you truly are, right? That shadow, let's say, within each and every one of us, right? And the point is, once this circus triggers, right, all sorts of ideas will come, and, well, ignorant people will always accept things, right? Some may actually use a bit of discernment, but ignorance means ignoring that, because, discernment is the greatest enemy of ignorance, because ignorance is also about control. You want to control everyone and have them believe what you believe in, right? And if they don't, if they are using their discernment, they're definitely gonna be your arch nemesis, right? Because people who can use their discernment are very dangerous to ignorance, because ignorance cannot control those. And if you can't control someone, well, that's a dangerous thing, right? Because you're always defensive. When you're ignorant, you're always expecting someone to do something, right? So you're always gonna do evil in a sense of preemptive strike, right? You're always gonna preemptive strike on others because you don't want them to do something that you fear. Most likely they won't do it, but, well, as I said, it never matters what the true reality is when you're dealing with certain people. It matters only what they believe in, because bringing down the beliefs of certain people, right, especially those that keep them in ignorance, well, that's how one is really helped to tend towards enlightenment. So having had hundreds of generations, right, hundreds of years of people focused constantly on this God, well, where your attention goes, as New Age spiritualists say, also your attention, or your energy, well, your energy flows. So if, for example, some occult groups were capable of harnessing that energy, right? I mean, you don't need to use occult powers to harness that energy, because once you have created an idea and people put their energies towards that, even ignorantly, right, all that energy will simply gather and gather and gather. It will create a kind of a gravity, right? It will create a certain, let's say, energy body, which will become more and more stable. So I don't know what monsters humanity has been creating through that, because through such ideas, one can actually create certain, let's call them gods, right? Certain deities of great power. But the point is, those constantly need to be fed. And well, I'm sure that that meant nothing else than the development of the matrix that we live in, right? Because for thousands of years people have been ignorant, but ever since Christianity came, this ignorance, right, and the idea of forced control have been, more and more imposed, have been more, not necessarily strict, but they have been more structuralized, right? And nowadays we have the idea of, full submission, right? Because it's not a point that they're taking your freedoms just like there happens to be right now in the Kant virus era, right? It's not about that. It's just that when consumerism came and you literally have anything you theoretically want around you, the point is you're just going to live as a slave of matter, because, pun intended, as a matter of fact, you're always going to chase things that you believe that you need. But again, a belief means accepting things without a necessity for proof. So ultimately, you're just chasing some dream. So the point about this is, well, ultimately, people may have created such a god instead of them being created by a god, right? So, yes, can this actually be a true case? I leave it to each and every one of you to simply imagine upon it, but don't forget, just imagine upon it, because not many people may reach, levels of introspection. And the point is, if you let people think for themselves, they most likely will call to their imagination. And the imagination is only limited by that which you know. So, well, including things you have forgotten mentally, right? Because they still exist there, but you mentally don't have access to them. Because the mind may have regarded them as, no longer useful. So the point about this, as I was saying, is, well, what if religion is, well, undoubtedly it is a creation of humanity, and this God is also a creation of humanity, but what if it is actually more true, right? What if we actually created such a deity, and through, constant belief in this, right, by ignorant people, such a construct is still being reinforced? And is it just because people still believe in all these ideas, right, and structures of society, this matrix still exists? Because sure, this God that humans have created, this God definitely has, an impact, right? Or is definitely part of the infrastructure of the matrix, if not the mainframe, right? That's why we also hear mainframe, right? Mainframe media and such. Mainstream, okay, if you want to call it the mainstream, right? And also, considering English is an occult language, it's not called mainstream for nothing, because a stream is a flow, right? And with religion, it is a main flow of energy, because so many people believe in a single aspect, right? A single entity. And they also share energy through that, because when you connect yourself to an idea, you also connect indirectly to many of the people and the ideas that have been thought about, right? That point. And you may actually share some of those unwantedly. Now, these are topics and ideas that I have, read from mostly from New Age spiritualists. So usually I don't take these other than with a grain of salt. What I would say is become introspective about this, but don't allow your imagination to simply build up beliefs in your mind and end up believing who knows whatever goofy things. So all this being said, I'm gonna close this video for now. It's been an interesting idea that I wanted to develop a bit. If I get any other ideas, I wouldn't mind doing another video. All this being said, you are appreciated. Take care of yourselves. Ferenc Board signing out.